can even use your phone to pay for your car wash before you set off. In fact, the mobile phone could see the end of paper money and credit cards altogether. Five ordinary objects, 5 extraordinary stories. Coming up, an object so elegantly designed that it has barely changed for over 100 years. But could new developments spell the end of a classic piece of modern technology? The secrets behind the light bulb. Next, on How Do They Do It? As day turns to night around the world, it springs into action. Few inventions have changed our lives so profoundly as this simple yet ingenious object, the electric light bulb. It's turned night into day, freeing us from one of nature's biggest constraints. Thanks to 1 billion brilliant light bulbs, the world lights up at the mere flick of a switch. And they're so bright they can even be seen from the moon. But have you ever stopped to think how they produce the lights we take for granted? Light bulbs seem like such a simple design. But look again. Each twisted filament made of tungsten metal must heat up to an incredible 2,500 degrees Celsius, enough for the tungsten to generate a glowing white light, but hot enough to melt gold. The light comes from electricity passing through a delicately coiled wire circuit. The thicker the wire, the greater the amount of energy that can pass through it. Yet the one thing that would put an end to this incredible reaction is oxygen. Oxygen is the enemy. It would make the tungsten burn out in the blink of an eye, which is why the glass bulb is so important, something the manufacturers know all too well. One of the biggest factories in the world making the classic-shaped standard bulb is the Philips factory in Piła, Poland. 3,600 people work here, and because the demand for their bulbs is so great, they work in shifts that go on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Something they wouldn't be able to do without light bulbs, of course. Last year, they made over 500 million bulbs, using enough little threads of tungsten to travel to the moon 12 times. Here, the production of the light bulb doesn't start with the metal filament. It begins with the bulb itself. Glass is made from a mixture of lime, limestone, potash, a kind of natural soda, and sand. And the factory gets through tons of the stuff. Lime stabilizes the glass as it melts, and the potash reduces the temperature needed to melt it. Thousands of tons of sand are used every year. All the ingredients are mixed together and fed into a giant furnace the size of an office block. But one final magic ingredient is, rather surprisingly, glass itself. Recycled broken bulbs, known as cullet, actually speed up the melting process, reducing the amount of energy needed to melt down the ingredients. You still need a lot of energy to reach 1,600 degrees centigrade. That's hotter than molten lava. How to get a light bulb out of a volcano? Next, on How Do They Do It? Molten glass is poured into a molding machine to make light bulbs. High-pressure pumps blast air into the bulbs to form their final shape and smooth the glass out inside the mold. At this stage, the glass is still very much a liquid. But there's a delicate balancing act going on here. If the glass cools too quickly, it will shatter. So each bulb is spun out onto a long conveyor belt and taken through a series of coolers, which slowly reduce the temperature of the bulbs to 90 degrees Celsius. But this reminds us of the biggest difficulty with handling glass bulbs. They smash really easily. So why doesn't all this rough handling shatter the bulbs? Philips have devised a series of crude but effective techniques for making sure this doesn't happen. Firstly, a shaky conveyor belt. Okay, it sounds crazy, but this vibration machine singles out the bulbs and picks out the weak bulbs from the buff bulbs. If they're too weak and crack as the result of the movement, they drop down under the conveyor belt. It's like evolution. Only the strong survive. Those that don't go straight back into the furnace as cullet. It's a cycle that produces 50,000 glass bulbs an hour. That's 15 every second. As the cascades of bulbs bounce around the conveyor belt, it looks as if they shouldn't survive the journey. But every drop, twist and turn is designed to be just within the tolerance limit of the glass. But they don't just make standard light bulbs here. This factory produces 300 different kinds of bulb. The production of a fluorescent tube involves a very different procedure. Molten glass is dragged straight out of the kiln and spun into one long tube on a 50-meter conveyor belt. These are then cut down to size and heat blasted at each end. If a standard light bulb smashes, it's no big deal. But if a 50-meter stretch of glass goes, the whole production line is brought to an abrupt halt. Then, it's action stations. An alarm calls a number of men to the scene. Light bulbs may seem harmless enough, but this is in fact a dangerous job, and you've got to know what you're doing. Stanislav Pogodzinski enters the furnace. He's dangerously close to an oven burning at more than 1,000 degrees. He has only a split second to grab some molten glass and get out of there. He can't hang around or he'll be roasted. He has to do this first time. He drags the glass as it begins cooling onto the beginning of the conveyor belt and hopes it takes. At this stage, the glass is very volatile. At any moment, it could explode. These glass makers are all highly skilled, and soon they've got the production line up and running again.
For 12 years, I've been making fluorescent lights. In that time, I've made 108,000 miles of tube. That's 4 times around the Earth.
Meanwhile, back with the standard bulbs, and a conveyor belt is taking them to be transformed from glass bulbs into electric lights. A modern city at night is such an exciting, magical sight. But as we shall see, all this amazing light comes down to some glass